One of the big turnoffs for hams new to DMR or digital mobile radio is the somewhat confusing programming that must occur before using your new DMR radio. In this video, we'll take a non-radio specific look at DMR programming to help you make sense of the basics. If you saw my video on getting a technician level amateur radio license, you'll remember that I mentioned that with one of the newest additions to ham radio, it's possible to hold a technician class license and still be able to talk to hams all over the world. Digital mobile radio, or DMR, is one way for that to happen. As is often the case, different vendors try to influence the market by using different protocols to accomplish the same basic task. That's the case with digital radio too. There are three main flavors for you to choose from. Kenwood and ICOM have paired with the D-Star protocol. Yaesu has developed and uses the C4FM or Fusion protocol, and many of the Chinese manufacturers such as Baofeng, TYT, and others have stayed with the business protocol first fielded by Motorola. Of course, the various protocols don't play well together in their native modes. DMR is the commercial standard that hams have appropriated and put into amateur use. It combines radio sets, internet gateways, and familiar radio repeaters with special functions to allow you to use a little handheld radio broadcasting with just a few watts of power to be heard all around the world. In this way, technician class licensees who are mostly limited to short-range VHF and UHF frequencies can be heard all over. As is often the case, when you repurpose a technology, it sometimes seems a bit confusing or not assembled in a logical way, and that's the case with DMR. That's because DMR was designed to do something different. When you have a basic understanding of what its original purpose was, it's easier to understand what's going on. That's certainly been the case with me with DMR. There are several good YouTube videos about the history and the development of DMR, so I'm not going to repeat that information. I'm mainly going to skip by that and instead look at the operating model, define some important terms and concepts, and lay out some relationships between those terms and concepts. So let's get started. But before we do, please click the thumbs up button below the video and be sure to subscribe to the Gadget Talk channel. Click the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos. In a commercial setting, a business might have a need for employees to communicate with each other around the property. A couple of examples might be a large warehouse or a big hotel and conference center. Such a business might also have the need to divide the radios those employees use into groups. For example, the hotel's housekeeping team, the security team, and the guest services team. Furthermore, those groups probably don't want to listen to the chatter from the other groups. Additionally, the hotel might provide transportation to downtown locations or the airport. In those cases, the radio system will need more range than can be gotten by a small handy-talkie. DMR radios can solve this communications need. Each team member can have a radio assigned to them that can be accessed directly. The lead housekeeper can address his or her staff individually or all at once. Special channels can be set up so all staff can hear of property emergencies, and still other channels can be set up to use a more powerful repeater or linked repeaters with coverage all over town. Using something called time-divided multiple access, or TDMA, the repeater can handle more than one conversation at a time. Now, with this commercial application in mind, let's take a look at some key DMR terms and try to relate them to the hotel scenario. First, We need to understand that the D in DMR stands for digital. That means the radio signal broadcast and received by the radios is a series of ones and zeros that get coded or decoded into recognizable voice patterns in the radio. Because they are digital signals, the sound is a bit different and the signal coverage also improves. What I mean by that is that unlike analog signals that degrade over a distance, a digital signal tends to stay readable to the far end of the radio's range and then just disappear. This chart provides a notional idea of what I'm talking about. It's also important to understand that when communications over a wide area is necessary, radio repeaters are connected together over the internet to provide the necessary radio coverage. In amateur radio, DMR repeaters all over the world are connected via the internet, allowing worldwide coverage. Next, let's look at several terms relating to information that needs to be programmed into the radio's memory for it to work correctly. Remember that as a commercial product, that programming was likely done by the radio service vendor who was trained to set up DMR systems and to use computer software to program his or her client's radios. As amateurs, we're allowed to program our own radios, but in most cases we're using videos like this to get our training. YouTube is a great learning resource, but even then, radio programming is most hams' biggest frustration when getting into DMR. Let's look at some of the terms you'll be seeing. Contacts, or digital context in some programming software, are the basic database element in your radio. In ham radio, contacts are either group call contacts or private call contacts. All call contacts are artifacts from DMR's commercial roots. Group call contacts are set for one-to-many radios, such as all the housekeepers in our hotel example. Private contacts are contacts for one-to-one radio calls using the radio's DMR ID. With that information stored in your radio, when called by that radio, the radio's display displays the caller's name and call sign. In typical ham setups, you'll have contacts for talk groups and for the private info of your friends and family if they're hams. Since I just added a new term, let's define that now too. That term is talk group. In our hotel example, the security team might have a talk group so that they can communicate with each other without disturbing the front desk staff or the housekeepers. There are a couple of organizations that centrally manage talk group creation for ham radio. One is DMR MARC, or the DMR Motorola Amateur Radio Club. Since DMR was first a Motorola commercial product, the DMR Motorola Club was technically prepared to establish the standards. A newer network management organization is called Brandmeister, and it's based in Europe. Both these networks have centralized control of major worldwide talk groups and allow for some level of interoperability. Both the DMR MARC and Brandmeister websites have more information for those of you who want to know more. Talk groups allow people to specify via an identification number a group or giant party line based on the talk group's purpose or location. You can think of this as a large-scale version of conversations on your local FM repeater. In most cases, anyone who wants to participate in the talk group can do so. Popular talk groups are groups like Talk Group 3100 USA, with coverage for all the United States, or Talk Group 3176, covering the Southwest United States. There are state talk groups, regional talk groups, and similar talk groups in many countries around the world. Your radio will allow you to program in many different talk groups in the list of contacts and align them to channels on your radio. The fact that you live in the US doesn't prevent you from programming in a talk group in Europe or Asia. Okay, so there was another new term, digital channels tie together the information we've entered separately. For your radio to broadcast, it needs to know what frequency to use, whether to use analog or digital circuitry, and what talk group or person to call and listen for. The channel display of your programming software will allow you to set all these variables. You'll give the channel a name that means something to you, such as 3100. Assign the simplex or repeater frequencies you want the radio to use, and specify two other things we'll define in a moment. Those items are color code and time slot. Then you'll fill in the contact you want this channel to use, and if your radio requires it, what contact you want it to listen for. This is called the receiver or RX group list. To access a repeater or digital hotspot, yeah, I know, another term to define, you'll need to know its frequency and offset if using a repeater. These are the same as analog repeaters. Use sources like Repeater Book online to find local DMR repeaters. Unlike analog repeaters that often use CTCSS tones to unmute the squelch, DMR repeaters use a similar concept called color code. There are 16 color codes, and your channel setting must include the correct color code for the repeater or hotspot you're planning on accessing. Also, unlike analog repeaters, as I mentioned earlier, a DMR repeater can host two conversations on the same frequency at the same time using TDMA, or time-divided multiple access. That is commonly referred to as the time slot, and the repeater owner will often assign several common talk groups to his or her repeater using different time slots. If your goal is to access a specific repeater and talk on talk group 3100, you'll need to know what time slot the repeater owner has assigned to that talk group, and you'll need to program a channel that transmits and receives on the repeater's frequencies and also has 3100 set as a contact. Again, online resources will be helpful to find out how a particular repeater is configured so you can set up your channel to match. If you plan to access several talk groups through the same repeater, each talk group will need its own channel on your radio with the proper talk group specified as the contact. With all the channels defined, you'll save your data into a computer file called a code plug. You'll upload the code plug to your radio, allowing you to select the various channels you programmed using the software on your computer via the controls on your DMR radio. Most programming software will ask you to download the radio's current setting and then make changes rather than starting from scratch. With the color code and time slot defined, let's go back and talk about a hotspot. A hotspot is a small electronic device that allows you to connect to the internet. Much like the hotspot function on your cell phone allows other devices to share your phone's internet connection. A ham radio hotspot does the same thing for your DMR radio. Most hams use their hotspots to connect to the internet via their home Wi-Fi network. However, you can connect hotspots to other Wi-Fi enabled devices that have internet connectivity. Many hotspots use a small Raspberry Pi computer to control the device and to make the connection to the Wi-Fi connection in your home. There are several brands of hotspots with a fairly wide price range. Inexpensive hotspots such as the Zoom Spot or Jumbo Spot can be had for about $100, even less in kit form. There are several excellent YouTube videos on programming hotspots based on the Raspberry Pi. If you're not already a Raspberry Pi person, I'd recommend following along step by step. It's not hard, but like most computer-based things, there are some things to avoid and others that you must do. You'll assign your hotspot a frequency and use that frequency in programming your radio for hotspot-based talk groups. Be sure to check the band plan and listen in on the frequency you're considering to be sure you won't be interfering with someone else. Okay, so now that we have the key terms defined, let's take a look at a couple of diagrams to tie this all together. This diagram represents the worldwide reach of DMR handheld radios through repeaters. The repeaters in this diagram are the radio towers, and they're connected to the internet, allowing the information on the various talk groups to be broadcast from repeaters located all around the world. This slide represents the key DMR variables that you program into your radio that are consolidated in the channel input. The channel input will require information regarding the contact, that is the talk group or the private group DMR ID, the frequency of the repeater or of your hotspot, the color code needed to break the squelch on the repeater or the hotspot, the receiver group, that group that you're directing your channel to listen to so you can hear responses from your broadcast, the time slot 1 or 2, and the power level that you'd like your radio to use when contacting that station. Those and a couple of other items are all consolidated in the channel input. The channel inputs then are scrolled through to direct your radio to contact the appropriate repeater and the appropriate talk group. This diagram shows a typical display for most programming software. You can see over here that you have various items in the software such as basic radio information, overviews of menus such as is displayed in this display here, your general settings for your radio, plus lists of contacts, receiver group lists, channels that you establish, and zones if you choose to place your channels within zones within the radio. The output of your programming initiative here in your programming software is the code plug that would be directed back to the radio when you've completed your programming. This diagram shows the channel input for the radio programming for the RD5R radio. It's very similar to other channel programming displays on other software. As you can see, you're making a number of choices in this menu, and you're relating to some of the previous inputs you've made into your programming software. So for example, in this particular case, this is a digital mode. The frequency for my hotspot is here, or for my repeater inputs would be placed here. I've specified a squelch level. This channel is called my hotspot Arizona DMR talk group. I've listed it in my scanning menu. I'm using a low power setting in my radio. And then in the lower portion of this display, you get the information you get from those other DMR database entries you've made. So, for example, the receive group list is a receive group that I built and I called Arizona. The color code for my hotspot is 1. Emergency system is not used. My contact from my contact list is also called Arizona, relates to the Arizona talk group number. And my repeater slot is slot number 2, which is what my hotspot uses to accept information. I'll have a channel display like this for every talk group that I use in my hotspot, and I would have a channel display like this for every repeater talk group I have, times the number of repeaters I've programmed into my radio. I hope you found this overview helpful in understanding the basics of DMR programming. With these concepts in mind, details in some of the step-by-step programming videos that target your particular brand and model radio will make more sense. For the technician class licensee, DMR is the least expensive way to get into this whole area of digital radio and being able to reach out to folks all over the world. The other digital systems work using similar principles and deliver similar results, although they tend to be a bit more expensive to get started. If you're trying to decide which system to go with, use the online repeater book to see how many of each type of repeater there are in your area, and ask some fellow hams if there is a preponderance of DMR or Fusion or D-Star in your area. If you found this video helpful, please click on the thumbs up button below the video and subscribe to the Gadget Talk channel. Click the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos. AA7JM here, and 73s.